Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the learning of Teres Hashem, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach, as we broadcast from my bungalow in South Fallsburg at the beautiful Elmshade Estates. And as always, we begin with Hakaras HaTov to TorahAnytime.com for their incredible platform of Torah throughout the world. As a matter of fact, earlier today I recorded a segment for their special Tisha B'Av burst of inspiration. They're always thinking about doing their utmost in Habatzis HaTorah. We also thank Kol HaLashon for their global network, Torah Communications Network, another wonderful carrier of our Shiurim, and we welcome in our Zoomers and those that are at the Gudas Yisrael Bezev. We welcome our subscribers, our viewers on YouTube and on Facebook. We welcome all of you. Tonight's Shiur is being specially dedicated by our new couple, Michal Avram and Shira Chavin, and it's in appreciation of their wedding and celebrating their new marriage, with wishes to Hashem that the Zivik should be Oile Yafazayin and they should have happiness and good health until the coming of Mashiach. I want to start the Shiur tonight with almost something whimsical. We know that initially, when they divided the land, there was a special law that was only for its generation of Leisosiv Nachala, that they shouldn't marry out of their tribe, but rather Ki ish b'nachaloso yidbekun. They should cleave to their own shevet. And talking about shidduchin, so it's interesting that the Hasidim really have as in many things, they have a different minig than the Litvisha. The Litvisha, when they get engaged and they become a chassan, they try to get married as quickly as possible. You know, the general period is about 3 months, and anything longer than that is frowned upon. And it's frowned upon from experience. First of all, it's a very fragile time for the chassan and kala, and therefore we want to get them married quicker before problems can surface. The husband and wife have certain powers to make peace, which are not afforded to a chassan and kala, and it's generally it's not so healthy for young people to have a significant other, but not be able to touch them, and we don't want to make that period too long. By the Hasidim, generally it's a much longer period. And so I saw that they bring down that the reason why the Hasidim give such a longer period is because it's a time of special tranquility. On the one hand, the bacher is not worried anymore about whether he'll find his zivik, because he found her. On the other hand, he's not busy yet with taking care of a family, which the Gemara calls Reichayim b'tzavara v'yasek b'tayra. He has a mill around his neck and he should be Isaac b'tayra. So they prolong this period of special tranquility, and they bring a raya. It's an interesting thing that it says Vatishkat ha'aretz arba'im shana, that the land was tranquil for 40 years, And the Targum is Metargem Vatishkat Vishaduchis. So we see that Shidduchin is a time of tranquility. So this prompted me to mention one of my Talmidim, one of our Zoomers, Yitzi Muller, sent me an interesting verse from Rameir Shapiro. Rameir Shapiro said, what's the nafkamina between a Chasidisha and a Litvisha? He says, the nafkamina between a Chasidisha bacher and a Litvisha bacher, the Gemara says in Sukkah that when Yonasan ben Uziel was learning Torah, so a oif, a bird that flew over his head, would get burnt. So he says a Hasidic bacher, when he learns that Gemara, he waxes and meditates. How holy Yonasan ben Uziel was. When a Litvish bacher learns the Gemara, he wonders, does Yonasan ben Uziel have to pay for the bird? Or is it only a grama? That's what Rameir Shapiro said. Now, it's interesting because I always had a thought about this Gemara, and that is, Chazal tell us that on the rooftop of the Beis HaMikdash, there was something known as the Kalya Oirev. There were spikes that birds shouldn't land on the roof and defecate and go to the bathroom on the roof, and it would be a bazayim. So therefore the Kalya Erev, these spikes, caused that the ravens, the crows, should stay away from the roof. The question is, if a raven flew over the head of Yonasan ben Uziel, it would get burnt. If it flew over the rooftop of the Kodesh Kedoshim, that's not holier than the head of Yonasan ben Uziel. Why wouldn't the bird get burnt? That kash always bothered me. Now it's interesting that the Baal Shem Tov, he said that when it says a bird, the bird is a symbol of straying thoughts, machshava zoros. And he said when any thought might try to encounter and invade Yonasan ben Uziel, his Torah would burn it. Right? Barasi Eitzar, Barasi Torah Tavmama. So that's the way Baal Shem Tov learns. But the Maisa is, there's a Marsha, we're going to get up to it soon in the Daf Yomi, there's a Marsha in the 5th parak of Bava Basra. The Marsha says that by Agadata, ein mikra yotzim minei pshuta. There could be many interpretations like this Baal Shem Tov, but the Pashut Pshat is certainly true. Rabbi Barzil also says another Pshat over here, that it says that the oif would be nisrefes, so he says a real drush. He says that a Pashut of Malach is called an oif. And there's a higher level, and that's a soraf. So when a Malach passed over Yonasan ben Uziel's Torah, it was elevated. When it says nisrefes, it was elevated to a soraf. Okay, again, this is a nice drasha. But the Pashut Pshat is that the bird would get burnt. So why, when it flew over the Beis HaMikdash, wasn't it burnt? I also had another kasha. We know that by the White House, lahavdil, and other important places, well, let's say, for example, by the Siyam HaShas. By the Siyam HaShas, Homeland Terror makes the Siyam HaShas a no-fly zone. No planes are allowed to go over MetLife Stadium by the Siyam HaShas. And of course, there's a no-fly zone over the White House. So we would think that the Beis HaMikdash doesn't need Kalya Erev. There could be a no-fly zone over the Beis HaMikdash. So, first of all, I want to tell you the first thing I always thought. And that is that a bird getting burnt is a high level. That's the miyaminoi eish das lamai, from his right hand, a fiery law to his people. Torah is compared to fire. So when it's such a concentrated Torah like Enes and Menazil, it creates a fire. But that's not the highest level. Torah, what is Torah called? Rachmana Amar. All over Shas, when it says a pasuk, it says Rachmana Amar. The merciful one says, Torah at its purest will not cause death to a bird. So the Beis Hamikdash, which is the purest Torah, birds don't die. That's one thing. The second thing, I always felt that the reason why there was a Kalya Erev on the top of the base, there could have been a no-fly zone. But a no-fly zone is Shaloi Kederech HaTeva. And the Rabbeinu Shloim made this world as much as possible b'derech HaTeva. I explained to you this many times. The Gemara says, whoever says Hallel every day is a mecharef and megadef, is a blasphemer. Now, how could memizr shemesh ad mavayah mahulol shem Hashem hoydul Hashem ki tov ki lo'elam chasdei? How could that be blasphemy? How could saying Hallel every day be blasphemy? And the answer is Hallel is said on a nace, on an open miracle. If you say that Hashem has to make open miracles every day, that means that his teva, the world that he created, has a lot of fires that need to be put out in unnatural ways. That's blasphemy. Hashem made the world perfect. There's no flaws. You don't have to put out any fires to say how, and therefore Hashem didn't make a no-fly zone. The same way that Noah could have put all the animals in his pocket. He could have wore a big raincoat and put them all in his pocket and used a special umbrella. Hashem made a miracle anyway. They couldn't fit in the boat. So why did Hashem bother with a boat? Okay, one answer is because he wanted 120 years for the Rishon to see the boat, and maybe they'll do tshuva. But another reason is, like the Ramban says, because Hashem does things in a natural way. So this was a natural way. Anyway, I just wanted to start the shiur with that. In our Parsha, the first Parsha, and I'm thinking to myself it would be proper to mention this Shabbos, I have a chiyuv of mafter. It's the Shabbos before my father's yahrzeit, Reb Aaron Tzvi ben Reb Meir, and we'll learn for his memory. So this is a Shabbos chazak. So in the first parsha, it says, Lo yachel devarai, a person shouldn't profane his word, kikol hayotzei mepiv yasa. He should do everything that comes out of his mouth. And we know that Chaysamay Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Emes, the very seal that something is godly is when it's truth. And therefore, great tzaddikim, who like to always walk in the ways of Hashem, and fulfill the halachta b'drachav, especially since when it comes to truth, the pasuk didn't suffice with the regular formula of a lav, thou shalt not, but it says also, midvar sheker tirchak, stay far away from lying. The integrity of the mouth is very important in Yiddishkeit. If you remember, I told you that Shmuel, who wrote Rus, called Rus in his Megillah, Rus HaMoyaviyah. And in Rus Rabbah it asks, how can you say Rus HaMoyaviyah, Rus the Moabite? She was already a Giyaris. You're not supposed to mention the former life. That's a Ferish halacha. So why did Shmuel call her Rus HaMoyaviyah? So it says something very powerful. It says that when Naomi asked her what happened in the field of Boaz, Ruth told her accurately what happened, but she changed around the order. And Shmuel says, some of the Moabite is still clinging to you. A Jew from birth would never veer from the truth, even in the chronological order. Jews are people of truth. That's why we're Bnei Yisrael, Titein Emes LiYaakov. That's why we're based Yaakov, we tell the truth. I saw over I read, one of the biographies I read, that I have up here in the country, is B'Mechitzasai, written by Rabbi Lawrence. And he writes eloquently about the Kapizhnitzer Rebbe. So he says that one time, the Kapizhnitzer Rebbe, Zechatzav Kodesh Baruch Hu Zchus Yagen Aleinu, was together in a vacation spot with the Talmud Rebbe, Zechatzav Kodesh Baruch Hu Zchus Yagen Aleinu, Frierdiker Talmud Rebbe. And they were about a half an hour distance. And the Kapizhnitzer Rebbe invited the Talmud Rebbe for Shabbos lunch. And on that morning, it started, as it happens in the country such time, it started raining like a mabel. And after davening, it was still raining ferociously. So the Talmud Rebbe made Kiddush, and he washed. And later on in the afternoon, as soon as it stopped raining, he immediately went over to the Kapizhnitzer Rebbe. And he saw, to his consternation, that the Kapizhnitzer Rebbe didn't make Kiddush yet. And when he said, Kapizhnitzer Rebbe, why didn't you eat it? He said, a word is a word, a vort is a vort. I said I was eating lunch with you. Tell you another story. One of the great Gaonim of the half a century ago was the Chibina Gaon, the Chibina Rav in Eretz Yisrael. So there was a Massai when the Chibina Rav came to Eretz Yisrael in the beginning, before people really knew what a Gaon he was. There was an astute fellow who recognized who this man was. He looked in his eyes and saw greatness, and he started being Mishamishim. And one time the Chibina Rav went out, was ready to go out, and he had a button hanging from his Bekisha. And this Shamish said, please, let me get a needle and thread and fix the button. So while the Chibina Rav was wearing it, he fixed the button, and it was right on the Chibina Rav's body. And inadvertently, when he was pulling out the needle, he stuck for a moment the Chibina Rav's body. And he got the chills, and he said to the Chibina Rav that he's afraid of Gehenna, that he penetrated the Chibina Rav's body. So the Chibina Rav said to him jocularly, he said, don't worry, if you go to Gehenna, I'll take you out. Many years later, many years later, when the Chibina Rav was already old and one of the Gaonim, he called this man and he said, you remember I promised to take you out of Gehenna? Now the man himself already almost forgot it. He looked and he nodded, stunned. He said, I hold by my promise, but please don't make it too hard for me. Don't make it too hard for me. Try to live righteously. Don't make it too hard. So first of all, you see how he remembered what he said. And second of all, you see that the Chibina Rav was confident of his power in the next world to take somebody out of Gehenna. This is similar to Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. There's a famous Massai with Rabbi Yaakov. You know, when they asked Rabbi Moshe b'meharachta yamim, So Ramosha said, "Man ganz Leben habe ich keinmal nicht getan weit zu a Menschen. My whole life I never caused another person pain." When they asked Rabbi Yaakov that question, he said, "I tried never to hurt someone, and I never told a lie." Yaakov is a man of emes. Rabbi Yaakov. So there's a famous story that a Talmud was with Rabbi Yaakov. Maybe I don't know. Maybe this happened in Tarvadas, but the Talmud was with Rabbi Yaakov, and there was an old Talmud Chacham that was putting on tefillin. He was 80 years old. He was putting on tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam. So the Talmud said, "Why doesn't the Rebbe put on Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin?" So Rabbi Yaakov said, "When I'm as old as him, I'll also put it on." So they said when Rabbi Yaakov's 80th birthday, he started putting on Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin. And people that knew him said, "Why? What was?" He said, "A word is a word." He remembered. And Rabbi said, this power of lo yachal devarai kichol hayotze mipiv yasa is that if a person doesn't profane their word, then Hashem fulfills. That's the koyach of a bracha of an Adam Gadol. Because the Adam Gadol is careful with what he says, and the Torah says if a person is lo yachal devarai, then kichol hayotze mipiv yasa. This is, by the way, this is a very good preparation as we head towards the portal of Elul in Yom Noraim, where we're going to ask Hashem many things. Zachreinu l'chaim, avinu malkeinu kasveinu v'sefer ha'chaim. Right? We're going to ask Hashem for many things. That it's a very great preparation to try to work on honesty. Midvar sheker tirchak. The Mesilas Yesharim says that we're so in the habit of telling stories and changing around the details to make it more interesting that we don't even realize it anymore. But lo yachal devarai kichol hayotze mipiv yasa. Rabbi say, I'm going to share with you now the most important point. You know, when I say this year, I have many points. This is certainly the most important point of tonight's year. The pasuk says, "Vayisu meichatzeros, vayachanu berisma." They traveled from Chaseros and they camped in Risma. Now here on the pasuk, on the name Risma, Rashi gives an etymological explanation of why this place is called Risma. Now right away the Sifsei Chachamim is bothered. Rashi doesn't give an etymological explanation of all the different names. How come Risma, he explains? So the Sifsei Chachamim explains beautifully, because earlier in Bamidbar, it wasn't called Risma. It says, "Va'achar naso ha'am mechatzeros, va'yachanu b'midbar paran." They camped in Midbar Paran, so it doesn't say Risma, it says Midbar Paran. So why over here does it change, and instead of Midbar Paran, it says Risma? So Rashi says a scary thing. Rashi says it's called Risma al Shem HaMeraglim, because of the spies. And he quotes the pasuk in Tehillim, "Ma yitein lecha, o ma yosef lach, l'shayn remiyah." What can I give you? What can I add to you? The deceitful tongue. Chitze giborim, arrows of the gibar. Chitze gibar shinunim. The arrows of the mighty one are sharp. Im gachale risamim, with coals of broom. Now, let me tell you first what this pasuk means. The pasuk means Hashem says to the tongue, "What can I give you and what can I add to you?" I already put you behind two barriers. You're behind the teeth and you're behind the lips. So you should know that the punishment is chitze gibar shinunim, the arrows, like sharpened arrows of the warrior, with coals of broom. That's a certain species of coals called gachle resama, coals of broom that never fully go out. So says Rashi, it says vayisu mechatzeros v'yachanu berisma, because the place of the meraglim reminds us for the sin of lashon hara, they're going to be burnt by coals that will be unending. Now, there's a elementary lesson over here that's chilling. If Rashi wanted to refer to us to the sin of the meraglim, to lashon hara, it could have said by Yisumei Chatzeris v'yachanu b'pira. We have piachiros, pira, and remember the lashon hara of the meraglim. But the Torah tells us if you think of lashon hara, the only way to avoid it is to think about its punishment. You have to think about risma. You have to think of coals of broom. Because lashon hara is so seductive. You know, you want to have what to talk about with your wife. You know, you want to be the guy that knows the gossip, that knows the scoop. You know, it's exciting to hear the good news. You know, the new news. What's news? What's nice? And we know that it's so seductive that the Gemara tells us, "V'kulan ba'avak lashon hara." Everybody is guilty of avak lashon hara. So the way to hold back is to think about the punishment. And there's a lot to think about. You know, we know, as we mentioned earlier in the Shiur, that Hashem does everything b'derech hateva. And yet when it comes to lashon hara, Hashem does unnatural things. The punishment of tsaras, of Mitzayra, is unnatural. That's why it's not natural to get this disease, because we don't go to the doctor, because the doctor can't help us. It's not natural. Mitzayra Maitzira Shaloi K'derech. Hashem said, for this punishment, I need to do something unnatural. We have to know that there's a famous Mamloyes about tsaras. The Mamloyes says, you know, people are bothered. They see people always talking lashon hara, and their skin is clear. They have porcelain skin. It's so beautiful. What about the lashon hara? This is the kasha from the Mamloyes. So the Mamloyes says you should know that there's tsaras haguf, but there's something worse. It's called the tsaras of the neshama. And he says sometimes when a person speaks bad about others, Hashem gives the soul tsaras. And when the neshama goes up in the night, when we sleep, the neshama goes up to Shemayim, kol kedoshei mala, all the celestial angels are nifrodin mimena. They separate. And they say, Tameyu, he's Tameh. If a person doesn't do tshuva, when he dies and leaves the world, his nefesh is put into the fourth chamber of Gehenna, which is called Tit Yavan, like a wet mud, and there's a place there called Saras, and the person is given a lot of Yisurim Kashim, a lot of suffering. Also, we should know, it says, it's a Ferish Chafetz Chaim, that today, when we don't have official tsaras, person isn't banished from the community. So instead, it says Mitzayra Chashiv Kameis. There's another thing that's Chashiv Kameis. An ani is Chashiv Kameis. He says a lot of times people get impoverished because of lashon hara. Gemara tells us, He's fit to be thrown to the dog. Why the dogs? Because the dogs knew how to control their mouth. When we went out of Egypt, the dogs didn't bark. So therefore, the person is, what are we doing over here? In order to avoid Lashon Hara, you have to think Risma. You have to think of the punishment. You know, the Marsha says, it's a famous Marsha, that the 24,000 Talmidei Rabbi Kiva that died, they died because the Gemara Yavama says, Mipnei Shaloi Nagu Kavod Zeh Lezeh. But the Marsha says they spoke Lashon Hara. Now, how did they die? So the Gemara tells us they died from askara. They choked to death. Askara is translated as diphtheria, which is a disease that a skin slowly grows over the windpipe and chokes a person slowly to death. That is considered the worst way to die. The Gemara says in Brachas, L'moves toitzois, issues of death. Toitzois is Begematria 903. So the Gemara says there's 903 ways to die. The worst way is askar. So again, it's teaching us how horrifying Lashon Hara is. Like we learned the ditty when we were in school. Lashon Hara Lamed Hey, go to Gehenna the easy way. Again, that's Risma. That's teaching us in order to keep us away from this terrible sin. Now I'm going to share with you something which I've given a lot of thought. A lot of thought to this. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. It's a famous pasuk, but the pasuk before, people don't connect with the famous pasuk. David HaMelech starts out, L'chu vanim, come my children. Right? We're all Talmidim of David HaMelech. Talmidim are children. V'shinantam levanecha. Elu are Talmidim. L'chu vanim. Shimuli. Listen to me. Yiras Hashem alamedchem. Let me teach you about the fear of God. And as Ramila says, let me teach you how to see God. Let me teach you how to be aware of God, right? Because when you're aware of God, then you have a good life. B'chol drachecha da'eyu. In all your ways you should acknowledge Him. V'hu yiyasher orcha yisecha. And then He will make your path straight. Right? That's what Ma'ashem Elikach l'shel miyimach kiyam liyira. So this question of David HaMelech gets to the essence of life. I made a bracha already, Rabbi Yisai. So l'chu vanim. Go my children. Shimuli. Yiras Hashem alamedchem. So now, Olam HaTorah, if they want to, I always say, in order to learn, when you hear a question, you should first ask yourself, what would you answer? And then when you hear a different answer, it helps you to adjust your thinking. So I know if I would say, let me teach you Yiras Hashem, so I would say, oh, Yiras Hashem? That's to daven. Because when you're davening, you connect with Hashem. So if you're davening 3 times a day, you're connecting with Hashem. You know, you don't visit most people 3 times in one day. That's a good connection to be aware of Hashem. Or I would say, even better, the 100 brachas. Al tikrei mo'el ameya. You think of Hashem 100 times a day when you make a bracha. Oh, that's Yiras Hashem. Or I would say, what Rav Miller wrote all his svarim about. I make my glory, sing your righteous. All his svarim are about this. And that is, study the world. Right? Look up high. No man put the sun over there, yet it's calibrated to the perfection. right? Scores of millions of miles away. It's calibrated to perfection that nowhere do we squint. It's bright enough. It's perfectly calibrated for photosynthesis, right? So Urumi bara Ela, you'll know that there's a creator, right? Mi Ela is Elohim, right? Mem Yud Alf Lamed Hey spells Elohim. So that's Yiras Hashem. So we would think that David HaMelech is going to talk about these topics. And then David HaMelech shocks us. You know, I'm going to surprise you what the next pasuk is. The Chuvanim Shimuli Yiras Hashem Alamedchem. You know what the next pasuk is? Mi Yoish Echafetz Chayim Oyev Yamim L'Reistayv Nitzar L'Shayncha Meira Usvasecha Medaber Mirma. The next pasuk is, you want to know fear of Hashem? Guard your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Now, I know it's a big Aveira Lashon Hara, but that's the answer to Yiras Hashem. So it's interesting. The Chavetz Chaim asked this kasha. The Chavetz Chaim gives a very interesting approach. He says that if you're a God-fearing person, so then that means that you don't want to displease Hashem with an Aveira. There's nothing that has so many negative prohibitions, positive commandments, and curses like Lashon Hara. So if you want to be God-fearing, then you have to watch Lashon Hara. And then he adds, and Lashon Hara is available and lurking throughout the day and night. Wherever you are. You know, it's even when you're in the bedroom in the night with your spouse. It says, Mishoicheves chekecha shmor pischei picha. From the one who sleeps in your bosom, guard your mouth. So it's a day and night temptation. So that's a sign of Yiras Shamayim. That's the way the Marsha learned. That's the way the Chavetz Chaim learns. I want to make, of course, this is pshat from the Gadol Hador, but I want to suggest more pshatim, which I really feel is intended by David HaMelech. The first is, when we think about being God-fearing and keeping away from veering off the path, the very first thing we think about is, what's the sin that brought death to mankind? Mankind was supposed to live forever. The sin that shortened the lives of every creature throughout the millennia was the sin of the Nachash speaking to Lashon Hara to Chava that caused the death to mankind. And therefore, if a person wants to fear Hashem, their starting point is to watch out from Lashon Hara. But it's more than that. What makes man special over animal kind? Moiser ha'adam min ha'behema is speech. Hashem made a person l'nefesh chaya. The Targum says l'ruach memalala, a spirit that speaks. That's what defines us. That's the window to our neshama. And therefore, l'chuvanim shimuli yiras Hashem alamedchem. Let me tell you how to be a Yiras Shamayim. To fear God. What does He want from you? He gave you something special. He gave us a mouth. Watch your mouth. This is the famous Gemara in Sanhedrin. I quote this Gemara often, and it's worth reviewing all the time. Gemara says, Adam la'amal nivra. A person was created to work in this world. This world isn't just a big amusement park. We don't just coast through life. It's supposed to work. But the Gemara then says, Eini yoidei, I don't know, im la'amal malacha nivra, if we're created primarily to work. You know, to help out at home, to visit the sick, to comfort the mourner, to bury the dead, to give tzedakah. Oy la'amal penivra. Or is the primary work of life the mouth? Now, most of us would say, and especially if we're Americans, as Americans, we're brought up with the feeling sticks and stones can break bones, but names can never hurt me. We're brought up that talk is cheap. Actions speak more than words. So we would say that Adam la'amal malacha nivra. And that's not the conclusion of the Gemara. The conclusion of the Gemara is, it quotes from the wisdom of Mishlei, from Shlomo HaMelech, Kisha Amar ki ukaf alav piu, you should have a saddle upon your mouth, have a Eimer Adam la'amal pe nivra. The primary achievement of life is the mouth. And therefore, since David HaMelech is saying, where could we start off with being a Yorei Shemayim? He starts off with, remember, Balak approached the Ziknei Midian. And Rashi said, Balak and Midian are not bedfellows. What was Balak doing with Midian? So Rashi tells us that Balak, who was scared of Moshe Rabbeinu, said he knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was many years in Midian. So he said, Manhigon shel elu b'Midian nisgadlu. This leader grew up in Midian. So he asked him, Mativai, what's his nature? And the answer was, Ein nosoi shel elu ela b'feh. The craft of these people is through the mouth. It's a big thing. We're specialists in the mouth. This is what's our specialty? It's an amazing thing. That's why the Gemara says it's an amazing Gemara. Everybody has to be, there are people that are trained. There's trained doctors, there's trained lawyers, there's trained therapists, there's trained plumbers. But everybody should be trained in the mouth to know how to keep quiet. Because that's our umnus. That's our specialty. It's an amazing thing. I want to tell you more about this. You see, if we're afraid of Hashem, one who's afraid of Hashem is afraid of prosecution. We make a lot of mistakes. Said Hashem's name without kavanah. I made a chilul Hashem in the street. I looked at what I wasn't supposed to. I ate without a bracha. There were so many things. The pasuk tells us, and it's a critical pasuk in Tehillim. Perek Ayin Gimel pasuk Tes. The pasuk says, "Shatu b'shamayim PM." I have placed in heaven the mouths of the prosecutors. U'lishanam tehalech ba'aretz. And they are allowed to prosecute when humans' tongues wag down on earth. The Son is only given power to prosecute when we talk bad down here on earth. And that's why Hashem says, I maftiach to you that you won't suffer if b'shoit, this is a pasuk in Iyov, b'shoit loshen techave. Actually, I don't think it's Iyov. You'll excuse me, but I have on my notes Iyov, but I think it's a pasuk in Micha. If I remember correctly, it's a pasuk in Micha. B'shoit loshen techave. If from the slander of the tongue you hide, then the prosecutor has no mouth. So if you're afraid of Hashem and you're afraid of the prosecutor, then stay away from the tongue. Then the prosecutor has no power. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu said in Mitzrayim when he heard Dasan Aviram say, "Halahageinu ata imer." Are you thinking to kill us? Kasher harakta es ha-Mitzri? Like you killed the Mitzri, and they slandered Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Egyptian authorities found out. Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Achei noida adavar." Now I know why Hashem is so angry at Klal Yisrael. Because there are Dali Torah, there is Lashon Hara. What a hakdama. As we said, we're entering in soon to the portals of Elul. And we don't want the prosecutor to prosecute us. If we abstain from talking about others, then the prosecutor doesn't prosecute. And by the way, similarly, if we don't listen to bad about others, then Hashem won't listen to bad about us. So this is a very big investment. You know, I want to conclude this little monologue about Lashon Hara with something that I heard from my great friend, Rabbi Newman. Rabbi Newman, who is chickens for Shabbos. By the way, it's a great time. Tzedakah is maybe Gula L'Olam. It's a great time to give to chickens for Shabbos. Who he told me, I believe he told me that they already gave $21 million for food in Eretz Yisrael to the most impoverished people who are eating tuna Shabbos afternoon. They didn't have chicken. You know, we talk about liver and tongue and all kinds of meat boards. They didn't have chicken. So Rabbi Newman told me a great thing. Told me, famous pasuk, Hamavis v'achayim b'yad haloshen. Death and life is in the hands of the tongue. Why does it say in the hands? Hamavis v'achayim b'loshen. Tongue doesn't have a hand. It should say Hamavis v'achayim b'loshen. What is b'yad haloshen? So what did we say from the pasuk earlier? Matitein l'cha u'mayosav lach l'shayin rumiyah. What more can I give you? I already gave you two walls, the teeth and the lips. But today, Rabbi say the hands that text, that email, that do instant messaging, that do Twittering, I think it's called X now, that do Instagramming. They don't have any walls. So Hamavas Achayim B'yad is now in the hand even before the Lashon. You have to be very careful. I said I was ending the monologue, but I want to add one more thing. There was a period that young women, Lo Aleinu, were dying from sickness in Eretz Yisrael. So a group of people wanting to do something to be masakin, to better the situation, they went to Rabbi Yashiv and said, what should they work on? So Rabbi Yashiv said they should work on Lashon Hara. It's very interesting what he said. He said that these tragedies come from bizui Talmidei Chacham, from talking disparagingly about Talmidei Chacham. And if we work on Lashon Hara, that won't happen. Now, the Tufchi Yabiu, it's such a great sefer, the Tufchi Yabiu, that I have because when we moved from Staten Island to Lakewood, I have still 40 unboxed, around 40 I think, unpacked boxes of Svarim. So I have a set of Tufchi Yabiu that's in those boxes, and I miss it so much that I bought another set this week to have it. So in the Tufchi Yabiu, he says that a good way to work, a starting way, you can't do anything cold turkey. So he says a good way to start is that when you talk, if you have to talk about people, don't mention names. At least start with that. If you're talking about groups, don't mention what group it is. So you're already way ahead if you do that. Of course, the Chavetz Chaim said that small people talk about people, mediocre people talk about things, and big people talk about ideals and ideas. But even if you're talking about people, okay, we're not such big people. But don't talk about names. That's a real big problem. Vayisu Midbar Sinai. Wow, it's 51 minutes already. Wow. I got carried away with this monologue. I want to thank again Michal Avram and Shira Chavin for dedicating this week's share. If you would like to dedicate next week's share, the first share on Devarim, 718-916-3100. Text me, 718-916-3100. rmmwsi@aol.com. Dedication is $360. And it says, Vayisu Midbar Sinai, Vayachanu B'Kivrois HaTaiva. They traveled from Midbar Sinai, and they camped in Kivrois HaTaiva. And, it's the burial of desire. And if you look in the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, it's very interesting. So he changes the name of Kivrois HaTaiva. It says, B'Kivrei de Mishalei Bisra. The graves of those that wanted meat, right? They said that they're tired of just a mun, which was kizraya God lavan, like a white coriander. They wanted, where's the beef? And we know that when they took the bite in the slug, they died. So it was literally kivras hataiva. It was graves that resulted in their taiva, in their desire. So the Mefarshim tell us that the meaning over here is that a person that travels, Midbar Sinai, a person that departs from the Torah and is not learning Torah, then Vayachanu B'Kivras HaTaiva. Then he's going to be buried in his desire. Why? So the simple reason is because Barasi Yetzirah, Barasi Torah Tavnullah. Hashem created the Yetzirah, and Torah is the antidote. If a person is not learning Torah, so then they're going to be attacked. They're going to be seduced by all kinds of taiva until they're completely immersed as if they're buried in the taiva. The Rambam says this. The Rambam says that the Yetzirah of arayas, of immorality, is found by a leiv haponim min haTorah. If the heart is void of Torah, then it allows for the Yetzirah of promiscuity, of lewdness to come in. But there's more to this. Because it's called Kivrois HaTaiva, the grave of Taiva. Because a person that lives a life solely of pleasure, of running from one pleasure to another, that person is not really living. This is the meaning that Rishoim afilu b'chayayim kriya mesim. The wicked, that means somebody that strays from the way of Torah. He's into all the pleasures of life. Afilu b'chayayim kriya mesim. Even when they're living, that's not life. Why is that? What does the pasuk say? V'atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom. If you're attached to Hashem, you're living a life of Hashem, that's chayim. If a person is living a life of one pleasure to the other, without Torah, without mitzvahs, that's not life. And that answers, by the way, there's a famous kasha on our davening. 3 times a day we say in davening, V'chol hachayim yodu chasela. And all the living thank you. What do you mean all the living thank you? There's 1 million atheists. And today, people don't even bother being atheists. You ask them, they're apathetic. I don't care. They don't even think about the question. So what do you mean, V'chol hachayim yodu chasela? The answer is, all those that are truly alive. That's what we say in benching. What do we say? V'ala kol Hashem Elokeinu anachnu moiden lach. Yizbarach shimcha b'fi kolcha. Yeah, Yizbarach shimcha b'fi kolcha. Yeah, those that are really living. Because otherwise it's kivras hatayva. It's as if the person is on a grave, even in this world. He's already in the grave. And this is why, you hear a pshat. The ikar is what you do with this pshat. So listen carefully. It means that someone who has a vacation in the summer, you have vacation, you have time, make sure you have Torah. You don't have Torah, then you're going to get walloped by Taivas. And this is true also. There's a big red alert if somebody is out of work. You see, work is a good thing. Person is out of work, they get into trouble. Because if they're not learning Torah, then it's kivas hatayva. The same thing is true when a person retires. Somebody's living in a senior community, it's not working. Be careful. Be careful that you don't fall into kivas hatayva. We're at 57 minutes, but I'm going to try to stick this in. By Reuven Gad and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them they wanted the inheritance on the Transjordan. So he said, if you go ahead and fight, then v'yisem nikiyim me'Hashem u'miyisrael. You will be clean from Hashem and from Yisrael. Now the question is, isn't it enough to be clean in the eyes of Hashem? If you're clean in the eyes of Hashem, who's boichin kloyos v'leiv, v'yodeya sisrei salumas kolchoi, he knows our innermost thoughts. So that should be enough. But it's not. Because we're also supposed to have a keser shem tayu, the crown of a good name. And the only way to have a crown of a good name is to protect ourselves from chshad, from suspicion. Now you might argue, and it's a good argument. You might argue, what do I have to worry? As long as I live the straight and narrow, as long as I know I'm right, the other person has a mitzvah, b'tzedek tishpan amisecha, to judge me righteously. If he wants to be a sinner, and judge me poorly, I have to worry about him? And the Torah says yes. You have to live a life of Yisem Nikiyam Hashem Yisrael. I saw in a tshuva from the Chassam Sofer that the Chassam Sofer wrote all his life he agonized to be above suspicion. This means that the Chassam Sofer guarded his entire life. You hear people saying, what are you so worried about what other people think? But it's not true. You have to be worried about what other people think. You have to live above suspicion. I quote many times, that's why there's halach, if you live on the corner, you're really supposed to put a menorah by a window on each corner. So the people walking on one corner aren't going to suspect that you didn't light the menorah. I have to worry. The person should be dan mi lekapschus, but you have to worry. Rabbi Dr. Twersky, Zech Tzadik L'Vracha, Schus Yagan Aleinu. I was in a wonderful swarm store in Woodridge yesterday, and although I have one at home, but I don't have it up here in the mountains, so it was in the used book section. So for $10, I bought Rabbi Twersky's wonderful Pirush on Chumash, even though I have one at home. So he cites from Rav Palm, from his wonderful Sefer HaTorah L'Melech, that Rav Palm tells a story about a person who went to court and they told him he has to swear. So he swore and then he paid anyway. And Rav Palm explains he swore because if he didn't swear, people would think that he was lying and he just didn't want to swear. But if he swore and he didn't pay, people will think, look at this, he'll swear falsely just for money. He wanted to be above suspicion. And Rabbi Dr. Twersky says, I mention Rabbi Dr. Twersky because I don't know if Rav Palm said this also in HaTorah L'Melech or he's saying it. But he says that if a person knows that he's owed money and he could go to a Din Torah and retrieve it, but if by going to the Din Torah he's going to besmirch his reputation because people say, look at him, he's in court, it's better for him to lose his money than to go to a Din Torah. Now I know this is a Ma'aser Rav. As a young boy, I know that Reb Ruvain Feinstein lost his chassan money because he invested it somehow, and he didn't want to go to a Din Torah, so he lost all his chassan money rather than going to a Din Torah, which is the way of Rav Moshe, the way of his father. They are people of peace. Actually, Reb Ruvain's name is Shalom Ruvain, so he's a great man of peace. And that's the idea of the Yisem Nikiyim Hashem Yisrael, always guarding. And this is, a person has to have a way of life this way. I always say an example that I buy a chasana and I eat by the smorgasbord in one place, and then I go over to have a drink, if I'm lucky, a Coke. I go over and I have a drink. Before I drink it, I say a pasuk. Why? Because if I drink it straight, somebody's going to look and say, look at the Rav, he doesn't even make a bracha. I can't make a bracha because I already made a shackle on the sweetbreads on the other side. But on the other hand, if I don't say anything, people will think I'm not making a bracha. So I say a pasuk before I eat it. That's the idea of the Yisem Nikiyim Hashem Yisrael. Now, of course, if you're not Naki Me Hashem, for a person to say something not nice to his spouse in public, or when they're in company, they don't treat each other nicely. Oy vavoy, that's not Naki Me Hashem, and that's not Naki Me Yisrael. Chas v'shalom, that somebody shouldn't do this. I want to now thank everybody for joining us. I want to mention that finally I was able to upload the Q&A, the full hour and 32 minutes of the Q&A, onto YouTube, so it's available on YouTube as well. And if you have not subscribed yet to YouTube, please subscribe. And or if you haven't subscribed to me on TorahAnytime.com, you should follow me on TorahAnytime.com as well. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful Shabbos.